Друзі, всім привіт! Сьогодні ми продовжимо наш подкаст Інституту американістики. Мене звати Владислав Фарапонов, і сьогодні ми в American University Kyiv. І у нас мега-ексклюзивний гість. Він колишній директор ЦРУ. Він також командував військами в Іраку та Афганістані. Він чотирьохзірковий генерал Девід Петреус. General, thank you for being with us, and basically, can you tell us why we are meeting in American University Kyiv right now?
Well, first of all, Vlad, good to be with you, thanks. We're here at AUK because I'm a longtime supporter of the American University here in Kyiv. I know the president, Dan Rice, very well. He's a fellow West Point graduate. I've watched his career over the years. And I have supported a son of a fallen Ukrainian hero to get an education here. My wife and I fund a scholarship to pay for his tuition. And now, today, in addition to doing what I always do when I come to Ukraine, which is to spend time on stage answering questions from students and from my moderator today, of course, it was the president of the university, Dan Rice. It was to announce a new initiative. It's called Mental Health Global, and it will be based here at the American University of Kyiv. The objective of MHG, Mental Health Global, is to build an AI-enabled social media platform that can help meet the vast unmet requirement for mental health assistance here in Ukraine. It's estimated that as many as half the population may actually need some kind of assistance, and the number of mental health professionals is wholly inadequate for that considerable need. And this is meant to augment it, not to replace it. And again, it'll be built with a large language model and free and accessible to all. It's a nonprofit. And when I talked to President Rice, I asked if there could be the expertise in the IT arena, again, AI and so forth, and databases, and also in the behavioral health field. And in fact, he's actually building a department that will be focused around psychology. And I've been able to obtain funding for what will probably be 4 chairs or fellowships, 2 different gifts of $100,000 annually each, that will enable the university to have individuals that are providing the IT and also the mental health expertise. There's a startup whose co-founders I had been advising on some other developments that can provide this. They literally are building the server stack, the technology stack, and providing the large language model that'll be the enabler, the hardware enabler, and the software component of this, and have expertise in not just data centers, but also in AI. Mm-hmm. And so that those co-founders will oversee this, but it'll largely be done here in Ukraine by Ukrainians. It'll be in 3 different languages, most likely, Ukrainian obviously, but also Russian and English. And we believe that this could really be a tremendous help for the Ukrainian people, and that if the principle proves here, and it might take up to a year to really build a fully functioning platform, although you could probably get a proof of principle within maybe by the end of the year. But if this can be proven here, it is something that we would then seek to introduce in other countries where you have similarly large populations that are experiencing a variety of issues in mental health.
So do you plan a close, I would say, collaboration with other American or European organizations that probably are doing the same in their countries?
We are seeking assistance, experience, lessons learned, and so forth. We've not found an organization that does this specifically. There are a lot of organizations that can essentially connect you with a mental health expert for a price. I mean, most of these are for-profit endeavors, and we're not aware of one that does this specific range of tasks that is free and accessible to all. So that's the idea and the intent. We think this is doable, but we do need to translate a vision into reality. It's never easy. I've had to do that a couple of times in 2 different wars. But it's a very exciting prospect, and the idea of being able to do that here at the American University, where you have the tech skills, the mental health skills, and the English-speaking capability, which is helpful for the interface, obviously, with the co-founders who have conceptualized this, supported by Mitzi Perdue, who is the widow of Frank Perdue, Perdue Chicken, the huge conglomerate, and me. Mitzi is so committed to Ukraine that she once auctioned off her engagement ring from Frank Perdue for $1.3 million and gave it to the Ukrainian police. She's also written over 150 stories. She's a very talented and gifted journalist, just over the last 2 years about Ukraine as well. She's been here a number of times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we basically don't have like a lot of time, but of course many in Ukraine right now talk about America in the context of elections. And actually former President Trump said that the U.S. Withdrawal from Afghanistan was one of the turning points that actually made Putin invade Ukraine. And you just mentioned that fact as well at the meeting. So basically, could you just elaborate on that very briefly?
Yeah.
And why is that? Because I don't think many Ukrainians really understand that point of President Trump.
Well, first of all, you need to understand that President Trump was the individual who, while in office, first built up forces in Afghanistan, and was quite encouraging to someone who commanded Afghanistan, also commanded the region, and was the CIA director, and then decided we needed to get out, and ended up agreeing to what I believe is the worst diplomatic agreement in modern American history, because it not only gave the Taliban what they wanted, which was our departure, it also included that we would force the Afghan government to release 5,500 Taliban detainees, including a number of former senior leaders who, contrary to the agreement, went right back into the ranks of the Taliban and helped in very substantial ways to take down the Afghan government and Afghan forces after the departure of U.S. forces and the enablers that we used to provide to the Afghans. I believe that we could have easily sustained what we were doing in Afghanistan. This is not a war like Vietnam where there was no way we could sustain. The cost in blood and treasure was just too great. Well, there was almost no cost in blood in the final year and a half of our time in Afghanistan, not because of the diplomatic agreement, but because we were no longer on the front lines. We were doing what's called advise, assist, and enable operations. So advising the Afghan forces and then assisting and enabling them in a variety of ways, but not fighting on the front lines. So the cost in blood was quite minimal. And then the cost in treasure, because it's blood and treasure, the $25 billion a year for an $800 billion defense budget was certainly more than sustainable as well. The situation was maddening, it was frustrating, it was a long war, but it's not a rule that you have to end endless wars. Sometimes you can continue them and try to stabilize it, get it to a situation that is once again sustainable. And I think we were fairly close to that, although there had been clearly deterioration of the security situation, but in part because the Afghans and the enemy knew that we wanted to leave, which is particularly unhelpful if you're in a contest of wills with an enemy. So again, for him to say that is a little bit it's quite fascinating because he would have withdrawn on an even quicker timeline, which would have meant that it would have been even more difficult to do so. It was poorly planned and executed as it was, but you can't get out of that kind of situation easily. It was, though, I think, an event that did lead President Putin, along with other events, such as the minimal response by the Western world to the occupation of Crimea and the Donbass in 2014 was another factor. And I think there were a number of these factors that led President Putin to think that the U.S. and Western response to a further invasion of Ukraine would not be that significant, and he was wrong. He believed that, as President Xi said after we pulled out of Afghanistan, see, you can't count on the Americans as allies, and look how that departure went. It's chaotic. They're not a great power anymore either. I disagree with both of those. I think that the U.S.-led Western response has shown what it is that we can do, although, to be sure, there have been certain decisions that have taken a good bit too long, and the current one right now is eliminating the restrictions on the use of our longest-range American Army tactical missile system, which is restricted when it comes to use on Russian soil in various ways.
Basically, General, don't you have an impression that the worst image that this war can have for Americans, and in particular on the U.S. establishment, is that this is another endless war, and basically that's the point when those who actually oppose U.S. aid to Ukraine say when there was no clear strategy, there was no clear vision how this war should end, and in that context, Ukrainian authorities also began to shift the narrative into the potential second peace summit about the scenarios how this war might end.
Well, first of all, again, this is not a U.S. war. The idea that we're fighting an endless war is wrong. The Ukrainians are fighting a tough, hard war against a barbaric enemy that denies Ukraine's very right to exist as an independent state and believes it should be part of the Russian Federation. But it's Ukrainians who are fighting and shedding blood for their country, not Americans. We have no boots on the ground other than the tiny little group that's at the embassy. So that, I think, we have to understand first and foremost. What we are doing is enabling a country that is valiantly, courageously, and with enormous innovation and entrepreneurship trying to ensure its very survival and to preserve its independence. And we should be doing everything we absolutely can to enable Ukraine to do that. And that's my bottom line. I think all freedom-loving peoples around the world should be doing more than they have. And there's a lot being done. $61 billion in U.S. assistance in just the latest package.
Yes. Absolutely.
That's bigger than the defense budgets of, I think, any European country.
Yeah.
So it's very, very significant.
You mentioned the importance of conditionality. In particular, in talking about some big ideas, it's important to say it depends on something. So I'm going to ask you, in your perspective, actually, what does Ukrainian victory or success right now depend on?
Well, the course of the war, whether Ukraine makes progress or experiences setbacks, etc., will depend on a number of factors. One of those certainly is continued U.S. assistance. I think that will continue. $61 billion in and of itself is going to last for quite a while. We need to accelerate delivery and so forth, but that is very doable. There's continued EU assistance in aggregate, collectively, and then also individual European countries and other Western countries around the world. I think all of that will continue, and I hope it even, again, accelerates and is increased. Certainly the production of weapon systems, the production of munitions like 155 millimeter howitzer ammunition, we're ramping that up very dramatically in the U.S., as are various European countries. It depends on continued Ukrainian innovation. The role that Ukraine has the role that technology has played for Ukraine has been jaw-dropping, frankly. For a country that has no navy to sink 1/3 of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, how do you explain that? Well, you explain it. There are great Ukrainian-made air drones that find the ships, and then great maritime drones made by Ukraine that sink them. It's forced the Russian Black Sea Fleet to withdraw its last ship from the centuries-old port of Sevastopol in western Crimea and from the western Black Sea, which allows Ukraine to export grain by ships again. The role of technology on the front lines. Thousands of suicide drones thrown at the Russians every single day. And the increase in production of these drones is staggering. The goal used to be 1 million drones every 12 months, which seemed almost inconceivable to me. Now I was told last night by someone at a dinner with the Minister of Strategic Industries that their objective is multiples of that. I don't want to get more specific than that, but that is just incredible. And then the way all of this is employed, the command and control, how AI enables it in some cases, how you navigate in a GPS-denied environment and against electronic warfare in which the Russians have significant capabilities. All of this is hugely impressive and very important as a factor in determining the way forward. Of course, another big issue is Ukrainian force generation. Ukraine, after quite an emotional debate itself in the Rada in your parliament, just as we had an emotional debate in the House of Representatives, did resolve the conscription law, changed it, made some adjustments to it, reduced the age of conscription, closed some loopholes, etc. And over recent months, Ukraine has now been ramping up the ability to recruit, train, and equip, which is, again, very, very significant. And that's a huge factor going forward. Ukraine, yes, it is heavily outnumbered, 4, maybe 5 to 1 in manpower, and in economic terms, 10 or more to 1, maybe 10 to 15 to 1. So it has to compensate, and is doing it with technology, throwing thousands of drones, again, at the Russians every single day, taking the fight to the Russians, using drones to go after refineries, taking out a modest percentage of the actual refinery capability, some of the storage, airfields, other critical infrastructure that helps Russia stay in this fight the way that they have. But also depends on Russian technological development and the Russians reviving their military-industrial complex and the Russians generating their forces with these huge enlistment bonuses, but they do lousy training, equipment's not all that impressive, throw soldiers at the Ukrainian front lines and human wave attacks. The losses are staggering, but it's a big country with a president who seems unconcerned by loss of life of his Russian soldiers. And so that's a tough factor in there as well. So then it depends on, does Russia get continued support from North Korea, China, Iran? Will countries continue to buy Russian crude oil and natural gas, et cetera? So as always, there's no single factor that determines the course of the war over the next few months. There are a number of factors. You're never sure what the coefficient in front of it is. It can actually change a bit. But clearly some of these are more important than others, especially if they're not going well. And they all bear careful watching as you try to identify, to determine, to assess how the war will go in the weeks and months that lie ahead.
Thank you very much, General.
A privilege to be with you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vlad.
Yeah, thank you.